Hi Janesville, welcome to Park Place Views, brought to you by the City of Janesville and JATV Media Services. I'm your host, Molly Nolte, and I'm the Management Information Specialist in the City Manager's Office. This monthly program aims to keep Janesville residents informed by highlighting the people, places, events, and partners in the City of Janesville. On last month's episode, we talked with City Manager Mark Freitag about the 2019 in review and the city's many plans for 2020. If you're interested in viewing past episodes of Park Place Views, they're available to watch on the city's website or JATV's YouTube channel. Today, City Manager Mark Freitag is joining me again, along with Finance Director Max Gagin, to learn about the city's 2020 budget. Mark is beginning his 7th year as the City Manager of Janesville, as he's been in this position since December 2013. Max first began working for the City of Janesville in 2009 as a management intern in the City Manager's Office. He then spent 2.5 years working as a budget and management analyst for Broward County, Florida. In 2013, Max rejoined the city team in Janesville as a management analyst and then moved to assistant to the city manager in September 2014. In December 2017, Max was promoted to finance director. Welcome back, Mark and Max, and thank you so much for both being here today.
Great to be here.
Great to be here.
So, Mark, let's go ahead and kick off the questions with talking about the city's 2020 budget. So, the budget was adopted by the City Council just in November here, and that's really where months of work come to an end. So, could you give us an overview kind of about the lengthy process that developing a budget is?
Yeah, so it is a lengthy process, but it's certainly the most important thing that the city does on an annual basis to essentially set us up for success for the programs, services, and infrastructure that we work on that next year. And so we begin the budget cycle and the budget process in August, and we kick it off with a budget workshop with our city council to help establish what those parameters are, those things we want to focus on, and then potentially some things that we need to avoid. And so we do that with the council typically the first week in August. We then follow that up with our budget orientation with the staff to talk about any nuances that we need to be able to address, and then really, any changes to our programming and how you input data into our budget system. And so we do that, and then the departments, the divisions, and the offices, take that month of August and into the early part of September to develop their own budgets. And so that's August. Then September we come back, and each department, division, and office briefs me on what their proposed budget is. Certainly Max is a key partner in that. We have all of that information come in, and at the end of the day, we kind of figure out where we set, are we still over, are we under where we should be, and if there's any reconciling that needs to happen across the city, we then hold a reconciliation meeting with all of our department heads to kind of set and establish this is the city manager's budget. This is the final approved city manager's budget. So that happens at the end of September, and then Max and his team go into production because we've got to provide this budget to the city council, and we present the budget to the city council in October. They have a few days to kind of digest it, read through it, and then we hold typically a series of 2 to 3 budget workshops with the council. And so the first one is my presentation of that budget to the council, and then they have an opportunity to ask questions, to make amendments, and we do that typically through these budget workshops. And typically by the end of October, the council then has, essentially come up with what we would call the council's, proposed budget. This is what they're happy with. And we do that, and then we put it out for the public to review in the first part of November. And at that first council meeting in November, there's a public hearing. The council continues to discuss, but that's when the public can provide input to the council on that budget. If there are things that, the public thinks we're doing that we shouldn't be doing, if the public wants us to do additional things or provide additional services, that's that opportunity for their input. And then at the second meeting in November, anything that the council wants to change based upon that input, we certainly, can assist them in doing that. And then they come back at the second meeting in November, they adopt the budget, and so it's kind of locked in stone. And then we come back typically first couple days of December and set the tax rate. So they approve officially the budget, set the tax rate, and then we're set then for that upcoming year. So it's a long process. You think about August through December, and frankly, Max and his team start, well before August. But August to December is really the city's as a whole budget process.
Yes, that is quite lengthy, as we said. And I'm sure that when it comes to developing a municipal budget, it certainly can't be an easy feat. So when city staff started the process in August, or even earlier, maybe in Max's office, like you said, what were some of the challenges that the city was facing as they began this development process?
Yeah, so when we started this process out in August, we were pushing the city's limit on what's called the expenditure restraint program, and that's something that frankly we don't want to violate that expenditure restraint limit, and I'll let Max explain that if he wants to follow up with that. But the challenge for us is we needed to give ourselves some breathing room, if you will, and Max and his team kind of worked through that. We got ourselves some breathing room in that expenditure restraint limit, and so the one thing that we realized we were going to need to do to make it all work was we were going to need to take what we normally do is we purchase each year 8 replacement squad cars for the police department, and we pay for that out of our operating budget. And so we said we needed to swing that to a borrowing program, which we do each spring. And it's, it certainly makes sense. It's okay. That was one of the things we identified long ago that we may need to do someday to give ourselves some breathing room in the operating budget. But shifting it to borrowing in the spring is certainly viable. We don't borrow for squads over the course of a 10-year note issue. We typically do it for the life of the squads, which would be 3 years or so. And so we were able to make that shift in how we borrowed or funded those police replacement squads. And then one thing that was a goal of the staffs that we wanted to pursue was authorizing an HR generalist position in our budget to help with human resource issues that the city, frankly, struggles to keep up with at our current staffing levels. And so, started out a little tight, but as Max and his team worked through that expenditure restraint program limit, we were able to open that up a little bit, and so a great process. But the key is that we had a challenge, we worked through that challenge, and we came out with something that was appropriate for the entire team.
Excellent. Looking forward to that HR generalist. That's going to be a really great move for the city. So, Max, in years past, sometimes we've heard that the city enters into the budget process kind of at a disadvantage. So, entering into the 2020 budget process, do you think we were at a disadvantage at that point?
So the city budget generally has challenges, and they're attributed to the fact that the cost to provide municipal programs and services keeps going up in some areas exponentially, and more so it goes up faster than the city's ability to generate revenue to pay for those additional costs. And I think the key component is for our general fund, it's primarily funded through 2 funding sources, which are property taxes as well as state shared revenue. They make up about 82% of that funding. And property taxes are restricted to what is called net new construction, or the new value added in the community. And then state shared revenue is controlled by the state of Wisconsin, and that has remained either flat or has been reduced in the past few years. So when your costs to provide these goods and services continue to increase and the revenues are stagnant, what we generally see is we have challenges. However, in 2020, we didn't have as many challenges as, say, years past, because some of our revenues are also sensitive to the local economy. So as we've seen, we've had a pretty strong economy these past few years. So there's things like net new construction, which was one of our largest in recent history at 1.71%, as well as we've seen some uptick in interest rates and the city's interest earnings. So certainly from a revenue perspective, the city was in a very good position. Our challenges more so lied, as Mark alluded to, regarding expenditures in the expenditure restraint program. As many organizations are having challenges with health insurance, as well as things like retirement costs and other wage and fringe benefits. So at the end of the day, we had to determine how we could try and afford the programs and services that we provide, and we'll ultimately be able to come up with a solution to get under our expenditure restraint limit.
Excellent. So, Mark, I've heard about revenue challenges and levy limits. What exactly does that mean, and how does this negatively impact the city of Janesville and Janesville as a community?
Yeah. So, as we've discussed in previous years and throughout the community, the state currently restricts the amount you can raise your levy by what Max has talked about, this net new construction. So, new building that's occurring in your community, and we all get that. That sounds good. The problem set is that over the past several years, inflation is outpacing, the amount of net new construction, and so every year you really lose buying power with that current restriction in place. And so, what that means is that as a community, we're out trying to bring businesses to Janesville. We're trying to bring jobs to Janesville, and I would even expand that. We're bringing businesses and jobs to Wisconsin too. But it makes it very, very difficult when you're limited by only net new construction, which, over the past many years, with the exception of 1 year, 2015 or so, our net new construction numbers has been outpaced by inflation. So the cost of providing those services, doesn't make up for the goodness that we're bringing to the community and the state through new businesses and then in turn new construction. So frankly, I kind of phrase it as a losing battle. You just never can get ahead. You take one step forward and two steps back, and so it's a frustrating kind of environment to operate in. And so it's one of the things that we've communicated to our legislators that this is something that needs to be fixed. And so our proposal, to our state legislators and to the governor's office over the past several years has been, hey, we get the fact that you want to make sure that there aren't significant swings in levy increases, across communities. And so we get that, but don't penalize us for working hard to bring jobs and businesses to Janesville, and, keep that net new construction as your increase, but then also make sure that you add in that inflation increase, and so you can keep up with that new growth in your community.
Right. And speaking of legislation, Max, something the city's been really vocal about the last few years here in Janesville is the city not getting its fair share of what's called state shared revenue. So what exactly is state shared revenue, and how does this formula not work here in Janesville?
So the state shared revenue program was started by Wisconsin, I believe, in the 1960s or 70s, and it essentially is a redistribution of income taxes that are paid to the state to the various municipalities. And how it worked is that there were really two factors that determined your aid amount: your ability to generate revenue, which is generally speaking property taxes, so your assessed value, as well as on a per capita basis. But what we've seen is since 2001, the state legislature essentially froze the formula and then has made appropriations based off of the amounts in 2001 since about 2003 and beyond. So what we see is that essentially they froze the conditions of each community as if it was operating in 2001. And the reality is that we're 18 years since then,
It's a long time.
and things have changed. For Janesville, we had functioning and open GM assembly plant, and that's just not today's reality. So what we've seen is communities who've had some dynamic changes in their local economy have been adversely impacted. And for Janesville, what that means is we do receive the third lowest state shared revenue per capita of our 14 peer communities, and that comes out to about $91 a resident. And for some perspective, some of our peers receive, $200 to $300 to $400 per person in state shared revenue. And the average of our peers is about $179. So it certainly does make it challenging, but if Janesville was in a position where we just received the average that our peers do, we would be receiving about $5.5 million more, which certainly could go a long way to continue to provide the programs and services that we do.
Absolutely. That's a lot of money when you think about it like that. So, Mark, hopefully people know how hard we've been advocating here in Janesville for change on these kinds of issues. Do you believe that the state legislators with whom you've had these discussions, do you think that they're understanding our concerns? Have you seen any action on that?
Yes, and so short answer is yes, they get it. We've had lots of conversations with our state legislators, with the governor's office and other members of both the Assembly and the Senate, and everyone acknowledges that the system that's in place is, not an equitable distribution of shared revenue. And so, I would encourage, the listening audience and members of our community, to continue to engage state legislators. So Senator Ringhand, Senator Noss, and Representatives Kolste and Loudenbeck, and let them know that, we need to see some kind of reform of that program. Either turn it back on as it originally operated, or let's reform the program and make sure that the state shared revenue across the state is distributed equitably. The challenge is that there will be winners and losers, and that's the political challenge that faces our legislators and certainly the administration of, how do we do this without, taking from some and giving to others, and creating some angst. And so I certainly get that. I would tell you that a couple of years ago, so the fall of 2017, the governor, essentially approved a $583,000 special ERP payment to the city of Janesville in recognition of the shortfall. $583,000 is a lot, for the city. But if you really factor it out, it's about $9 per resident. So it's really not enough to even catch us up to the next lowest community, if you will, in terms of that equitable distribution of shared revenue. But it did make a difference. And so we do want to thank, and continue to thank Representative Loudenbeck for kind of championing that effort through the Joint Finance Committee and ultimately through the Assembly, the Senate, and then and with the governor. And so the key point for the community, though, is that this funding has a sunset clause on it, and so it's good for 5 years. So, we received it in 18, 19, 2020 is our third year, 21, 22, and so we really need a solution before 2023 because, if we don't have $583,000, that's a lot of something going away.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep.
So let's change gears just a little bit. I understand that Janesville will receive $205,000 in general transportation aid from the state's budget. So, Mark, what is the city going to do with that additional state funding that's coming in 2020?
Yeah, so that additional $205,000 came, in general transportation aid additional funding. And we looked at that and we said, the intent is to help with transportation in some way, shape, or form. And, so the city's perspective is, we really need to make sure that goes to our road program. And so that's where that money, has been allocated is to that road program. And that's the right thing to do. And I would reiterate, we talked about that additional $583,000 in a special ERP payment. We did the same thing there. And I think that, again, that's about government accountability. And when we were lobbying, legislators about the unfair distribution of shared revenue, our argument is we're low police officers, we're low on the number of firefighters, our transit costs are the highest among our peers, and we can't keep up on the road program. And so when that money was approved, we said, let's make sure that we use this money to facilitate those shortfalls that we used in our argument, to get it. And so we were able to hire 3 additional police officers, 3 additional firefighters. We were able to reduce our transit fare for general transportation around the community by 25 cents a ride. And we were able to put some money towards road program. And so, again, we like with that $583,000 special ERP payment, we've done the same thing with that $205,000 increase in GTA, and that is we're using it where it was intended to go.
Yep. So, Max, it's a complicated issue, but I'd like to talk about municipalities in Wisconsin are not able to use a local sales tax. And tax is a complicated issue, so when people hear about tax, a lot of times they have negative kind of feelings about them. But if Janesville was able to create a local sales tax, what kind of an impact would that have on Janesville?
So I understand, people generally have challenges or misunderstandings regarding taxes, but the reality is, taxes come from really three different sources: wealth, income, or consumption. And currently, Wisconsin municipalities are heavily taxing on wealth, which are property, as well as receive shared revenue, which is income, and receives very little to nothing on consumption. And in order to have a diversified and stable revenue, you would ideally want to see a proportionate amount of all three. So in Janesville, we feel like a tax on consumption, such as a sales tax, would be beneficial in that those taxes are paid based off of how much an individual consumes. So you're taxing a broader range of activities and a larger number of individuals. And in Janesville's case, being that we are a regional commercial and economic hub, as well as located on an interstate, there's many non-residents who come to our community who would then be paying into a sales tax. And that is essentially shifting some of the tax burden from this community, from our residents to non-residents, because there are not many ways that a non-resident would help contribute for municipal programs and services. However, there's certainly an expectation that they have safe roads and that there would be a response from police or fire should needed. So we think it's ultimately appropriate to shift some of that tax burden to those non-residents. And what we estimate is that if the city had a half-cent sales tax for 2019, we'd see about $9 million more in revenue, which could certainly go a long way in funding both our operational capital needs. However, we also recognize that a portion of that could help offset property tax levy as well. So you could essentially, quote unquote, buy out a portion of your property tax levy, and that would ultimately help save money for the residents and be part of that redistribution of who pays for municipal programs and services. And one of the reasons we do think this is a very palpable solution is that Janesville, not Janesville, but Wisconsin as a whole has relatively low sales taxes compared to what we see from neighboring states. So taxes vary from about 5 to 6% in Wisconsin, and if you go north or south of the border, it's about 7 to up to 10%. So we don't feel like Wisconsin or Janesville would be in a competitive disadvantage if there was a slight adjustment to that sales tax that went to a local municipality, because we'd still be lower than what most people in the region are.
Right. Interesting. So let's change gears a little bit. We've talked a lot about the revenue side of things, but then there's also the expenditure side. And of course, the money that's collected by property taxes is used throughout the year and distributed amongst different taxing jurisdictions. So Max, what can you tell us about how exactly that all works?
Certainly. So the city of Janesville does produce property tax bills for all of our residents. However, I think the one thing that should be clear is that there are really 4 taxing jurisdictions that those property tax dollars go to. So in Janesville, that would be our Janesville School District, or if you live on the north side of the community, the Milton School District, as well as the city of Janesville, Rock County, and Black Hawk Technical College. So they all have a share in that property tax bill. And for example, the school district is about 33% of your tax bill. The city of Janesville is about 34%. Rock County is at 27%, and Black Hawk Tech is about 5%.
Okay. So if the city gets a certain amount of money out of each, let's say, dollar collected in property taxes, Mark, how does that dollar get allocated throughout the city? So public safety and different economic development tools, recreation, other areas, how does it kind of get split up?
Yeah. So, as we've shown the community previously, we've got a great graphic with a dollar bill and kind of how that is spread out across the dollar bill. But if you think about a dollar, it gets spent in the city of Janesville. 28 cents of every dollar gets spent for the police department. And so for those policing activities, 21 cents goes towards fire. An additional 20 cents goes towards all the things that Public Works does, and then 11 cents goes towards general government, which is generally those things that happen in City Hall. We've got 9 cents that goes to the Hedberg Public Library, 6 cents to Parks and Recreation, 2 cents to Janesville Transit System, and then 2 cents goes towards community development. And then finally, there's about a penny left over, and that kind of gets distributed to all other touch points across the city. But, I think that it certainly makes sense. As far as our distribution goes, people talk about how important, public safety is, and frankly, half of every dollar that comes to the city of Janesville gets spent on public safety.
Yep, that's a lot. So let's talk about general funds versus enterprise funds. Max, can you give us a quick explanation, really, of what that means and what revenues go to these different funds?
So the general fund is the city's chief operating fund, so it receives your general revenues, so property taxes and shared revenue, and it pays for general services as well, so things like public safety, general government, parks and recreation, public works, and then your enterprise funds are a segregated account that operates very much like a business. So those funds generally charge user fees, and those user fees pay for those programs and services. So an example of an enterprise fund would be our water utilities. So residents receive a utility bill based off the amount of consumption of water they use, plus the fixed infrastructure costs. That money goes directly into the water utility fund to help pay for, operating and maintaining our water distribution system. And I think it's key to note that, for example, if you make an adjustment or your water rates don't go to help pay for police or fire, those are in separate segregated accounts.
Right. So Max, there's sometimes miscommunication or misunderstanding, I think, about fees, and it'd be great if you could kind of tell us about how fees are used in Janesville.
So, as I mentioned previously, user fees are a really small portion of the city's budget. We don't have many means for taxing on consumption. However, what a user fee does allow is that if someone is enjoying a very tangible private benefit, that they pay a fee for that. And when we look at fees, we determine, how much does that program cost to provide, and then whether a fee would be appropriate for that. Mm-hmm. And then what is the appropriate cost recovery goal for a fee? So, for example, if we have a recreational program, mm-hmm. and it costs X number of dollars, maybe we say we want to recover 50% of the cost of providing that program, with the recognition that providing those avenues for adults and youth alike, is a good public benefit. Mm-hmm. So we're agreeing to pay a portion of that with property taxes, a portion with fees. So if you sign up for a camp, you'd pay a fee for that. And I think one of the key takeaways from my perspective is that as the costs of providing those programs and services increase, you need to look at your fee structure and adjust accordingly. Right. Because if the cost continues to rise and you're not adjusting your fees, essentially what you're asking is for that general taxpayer to pay a larger portion of providing that program or service, and you're asking for that participant for less. So, I understand there are instances where people may not like paying a user fee, but it's typically something that is, again, a very tangible or private benefit, whether it's a building permit or admission to a pool, whereas, some property taxes are primarily for your general services, such as public safety or maintaining parks, where sure. It's very difficult to have a very tangible private benefit per se that we could charge, for the use of those services.
Right, that makes sense. So let's get back into the budget again just a little bit. Mark, I know the city really prides itself on being a responsible fiscal steward of our taxpayers' dollars. So were there any significant changes to the 2020 budget?
Yeah, from the public's perspective, I would offer that no significant changes are going to be readily visible by members of the public. And so, no changes, significant changes to programs or services or infrastructure that we're able to provide. But as I've mentioned previously, we certainly, as a method of managing money. You know, we moved the purchasing of those 8 police squads from our operating budget to our borrowing system and program. So that was certainly a change. And then we've got a couple other things that have played out, you know, as we've worked through the budget process. So I mentioned that we'll be able to hire a new HR generalist for the city, and that's a critical personnel fill, and so we're glad that that one is going to get done. But I would offer that we're also able to, develop a citywide emergency operations plan. One of the things that we're required to do is to have an emergency operations plan here for the city of Janesville. We've never had one. We don't currently have one. We should, because in an emergency, it'd be the first question that people would ask was, where's your emergency operations plan? So we really need to get that going. Something that also came up this past year that we're working through, and that is, we have some basic infrastructure around the city that frankly has not been maintained to the level of ADA compliance. Now, there's no requirement to make those changes until you're on site doing some kind of improvement, and so those things are grandfathered, but I don't think that we as a city have a good feel and an understanding for how many things and where they're at need to get fixed in our city facilities and in our public spaces that bring us up to ADA compliance and those requirements. So we're going to do essentially a survey across the city of what those needs are so that we can then prioritize and get some of those critical things done, certainly in the coming years. So we need to figure out whether we're in compliance. One of the things that the City Council wanted to make sure we did this year was conduct a citizen satisfaction survey, and so we will send out a very formal, managed, documented, survey, get feedback from the community on what the community, likes, what the community doesn't like, what we can work on, and then certainly some priorities for the community. And so looking forward to getting that thing rolling here in 2020. And then something that we're doing internally is we're taking a look at a review of our compensation and benefits for our city employees. It's always good for us as an organization to understand, are we paying appropriately and are we providing appropriate benefits for our city employees as it relates to other municipalities in the surrounding area, and then frankly with the private businesses in the surrounding area, because we certainly want to take good care of our employees, and I think we do. We also want to make sure that we remain competitive with those other potential employers.
Sure, that makes sense. So during the budget process, the city also starts to plan what are called capital projects, and what ones will be completed in the following year. So Max, tell us a little bit about how a capital project is defined and how they're funded too.
Sure. A capital project is really to maintain or improve a city asset, which we often call infrastructure, and it generally meets some certain criteria. So certainly the construction or expansion, renovation or replacement of an existing city facility or facilities, as well as major maintenance and rehabilitation projects of existing facilities, things that will last more than 10 years, as well as capital equipment purchases that have a life of at least 3 years. So that's kind of the definition that we operate under when we think of a capital project. And those capital projects are included in what is called the city's 5-year capital improvement program. So we have a schedule of what capital projects we'll do for the next year all the way to 5 years, and then we also evaluate what funding sources are available to help finance those capital projects. And in Wisconsin, most communities fund their capital improvement program through the issuance of general obligation debt. So that's certainly a large portion of the funding sources for our capital improvement program. But we also do receive state and federal grants, as well as user fees to help offset some of those costs.
Sure. So Mark, in 2020, what are some of the big capital projects that we can expect?
Yeah, so first of all, we're all focused on the downtown and the revitalization efforts that are aligned with our Arise plan. And so we've got two projects that we need to finish up because we wanted to get them done this year, but frankly, because of high water and a whole lot of rain in the community, those were delayed. So one is we got to finish up the Milwaukee Street Bridge reconstruction. And if you remember, we started taking that bridge down in October of 2018. We're here in December currently of 2019, and we've been able to open up 2 lanes and 1 pedestrian sidewalk, but the other side, that southern side of the Milwaukee Street Bridge, still needs to be finished up. And so we've got some work to finish up in the spring with that project. Equally, we have the Blaine Gilbertson Family Heritage Bridge, which is a pedestrian bridge which connects the east side from the west side, in between the Milwaukee Street Bridge and the Court Street Bridge in our town square. And again, high water, rapid water, and a lot of rain caused that bridge construction to be delayed. So we'll have to finish that up hopefully in the spring of 2020, maybe into the early summer. But again, very, very dependent upon the amount of rain we get, plus the height and the velocity of the river water. The scheduled project for 2020 is to complete the east side of the town square, and so that's the ground that's between Water Street and the riverbank on the east side of the river. And we're going to have some nice attributes there. There's going to be another pavilion, the Cope Ryan Pavilion. We're going to have a fire pit there. We're going to have a raised deck with some lounge chairs so you can sit out and just enjoy the ambiance of being along the river. There's going to be some additional parking and some information kiosks, and so it will be very, very nice, and that will finish our town square project. But that all needs to get done, and frankly, as we learned this year, we're very dependent on whether we have good weather or not. So certainly Arise continues road program. If you remember, in 2016, the city increased our road program mileage to 12 miles per year. We've been doing that since 2016, and we're going to continue that in 2020. So, as a reminder, the city has over 330 miles that we maintain, and given the average lifespan of 25 years of a road surface, we know we need to do 12 miles per year just to keep up. Not to make it better, but just to keep up with that demand. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention buses. And so currently we have 17 buses in our city fleet, and it's a transportation network that many, many people in the community depend upon. And those 17 buses, frankly, have all hit their end of life. A bus of that size and that nature at 12 years or 500,000 miles is considered at the end of its life. And all 17 of our buses have reached that point. So over the last couple of years, the city's been very aggressive in submitting grant requests, both federal and state dollars. I'm very, very pleased to share with the community that we've received grant funding for all 17 buses. There's certainly a local share of that the community will have to provide, but the good news is that we've received 6 buses already. That's this past October. We're going to receive another 9 buses in the April-May time period of 2020, and then I would expect our final 2 buses to come in 2021. And so here by the end of 2021, all 17 of our buses will be brand new buses, and so we're really excited about that. But that's been that's a typical good capital investment for the community. A couple other items. We're going to purchase a new fire engine for the fire department, and we're going to buy a second set of turnout gear for all firefighters. It's important for our firefighters when they go into a burning building. They're covered with smoke and soot and debris, and that's not good stuff, and you got to send it out to get washed and cleaned. But then do you have a second set that they can roll into? And we have those, but they're not been turned over to the degree that they should, and so they're probably not as good as they should be. And we need to do the right thing by our firefighters, as I know you can appreciate. And so we're going to make sure that we get that second set of turnout gear purchased and updated. So that's a big one. We are going to renovate the pistol range for the JPD. It's time for that to happen. That facility needs some work. And then again, something we're completing from this year is the City Hall front plaza improvements. That structure out there was becoming unstable and unsafe, and so we need to fix that. We started it this year. Unfortunately, again, because of a rainy September and early October, kind of got pushed into next spring, and so we'll finish that one up next spring.
Lots of stuff coming in 2020.
Yep.
So something that's really important to Janesville residents is the value of the services that they receive from the city in exchange for what they pay. So Max, how does the city measure the cost of those programs and services compared to maybe other municipalities or cities in Wisconsin?
So first, I'd like to say, the city of Janesville, we do pride ourselves on providing quality services that our residents do expect, and we provide those at a great value. As such, city staff, what we do is we benchmark how much it costs to provide a service in Janesville versus what it costs for our peers to do that. And when we look at those benchmarks, then we can make decisions on other ways we can modify our programs to make them at a better value to our residents. So when we look at the data, in 2017, the city of Janesville's per capita spending on things like general government, public safety, and street maintenance was all in the lower third of our peers, which is great to see. When you actually add those all together in what they call basic spending, you see that we in Janesville actually spend the lowest amount per capita on those services. So I think what that is really a testament to is that the programs we provide are as efficient as possible, and they do come at that great value for our residents. The city does put together a peer community financial analysis, and we have that on our city website, so residents can see how Janesville's cost to provide different services compares to other larger municipalities in Wisconsin.
So much information that we've gone over already, and if people are not a numbers person like me, they might need kind of a second stab at kind of digesting all of this. So Mark, if folks want to take a little bit deeper of a dive into the budget and expenditures, revenues, things like that, is there a way they could find that information?
Yeah, absolutely. So our city website, hosts not only our current 2020 budget, but budgets of the past. And to your point, the city wants to be transparent. We want to be accountable. We certainly want to be responsive, and we want to be accessible. And one of the ways of being accessible is making sure that current information is readily available for our residents and our community members, to dive into. And so, first and foremost, our 2020 budget is out there online at our city website /2020 budget, and so people can dive into that to whatever level they want to. But one of the things that I think is really special, and that is one of the things Max did many years ago as the assistant to the city manager, was he created open budget and open expenditures websites where you can go in and you can look at budgets from 2008 to present. And you can see what those trends are. You can go into expenditures and compare snow removal from 2008, 9, 10, and what that looks like over time. Right. And so it's just, those are two great programs for the community to do a deeper dive, should they want to, in how the city historically spends money. And then the other thing that I would advocate for, again, this is something that Max worked on when he was in the city manager's office, was Park Place Performs. And so communities want to look at how we measure ourselves. Are we successful in what we're promising, if you will, to our community? And one of the ways that we do that is we measure performance, and we do that through a system called Park Place Performs, where we look at our 9 strategic goals, and we have certain measures where we look at the outcomes that we're producing from those measures. And so I would encourage folks to visit Park Place Performs. There's a link on the website for people to do that. If you ever have questions, we would encourage the community certainly to call and ask or come visit.
Wonderful. Well, we're just about out of time. Any closing thoughts, Mark, Max, for our viewers at home?
Yeah, so I would say that I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's important for our community members and certainly the listening audience to reach out to our legislators. If there's one challenge that's facing the city of Janesville, it's our inability to generate revenue to keep up with a growing community. Right. And so whether that's shared revenue, whether that's levy limits, whether that's sales tax, or something else, we need to start that conversation, because 2023 is just down the road, and we can't afford to lose that $583,000 without something to replace it. And I don't think we're being unreasonable as a community. I think we're asking the state to treat us fairly and equitably, just like they would any other community. And so I don't think that that this is intended to be negative in any way, shape, or form. It's trying to ensure that our community is being treated the way that other communities in the state are being treated. So I would encourage folks to reach out to our legislators and talk to them about some of these concerns that certainly we've raised here, and other concerns that the community may have. And if the community is interested in learning more about the city's legislative agenda, whether that's at the state level or even at the federal level, they can do that by going to our website /legislative. And lots of great information out there on the website. You're the manager, you know the deal, and so I encourage folks to use that asset.
Excellent parting information, Mark. So if you have any more questions for the City Manager, Mark Freitag, or our Finance Director, Max Gagin, please feel free to contact them. Their information is listed on your screen, and you can always find it on our city's website. Thank you so much, Mark and Max, for being here today and giving our viewers really a deeper understanding of the city's 2020 budget. And thank you, viewers at home, for tuning in. Next month, I'm looking forward to bringing the Assistant to the City Manager, Maggie Dar, into the studio. Maggie is going to talk to us about the city's boards, commissions, and committees, and how you can get involved. In addition to tuning into this program on a monthly basis, stay connected to the City of Janesville by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. You can also sign up to receive emails with our press releases and other important information. And you can subscribe to get emergency alerts from Janesville Police Department on Nixle. For Park Place Views and the City of Janesville, I'm Molly Nolte. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next month.